God of love, we thank you that you are abounding in mercy. We acknowledge as we come here before you that there have been things that we have done this week that we are not proud of. We acknowledge them before you. We ask for your forgiveness. And we thank you for your unending promise to cleanse us and bring us new life. Amen. We've been travelling through the book of Matthew these last few weeks, and this year we continue through this book, the first story in the Bible that tells the story about Jesus. So we continue today, and I think it's a really interesting passage, and the bit that I'm going to pick up from it is what do we do when churches disagree, or what do we do when people who have faith in Jesus disagree, and how do we resolve these differences? And there are a lot. I think perhaps even more than political parties, churches have the ability to figure out what they don't agree on, all the things that they disagree with, that they find fault in the other person. You think even in this last year when we had our first ever female Archbishop of Canterbury, that's the kind of head of the Anglican Church, you know, people are outraged. How do we deal with these sorts of differences? In the Anglican Church, we have traversed many of these differences over the last few years, sometimes with torturous results, trying to figure out what do we do when we have differences. So here I'm going to read you the passage from Matthew. Here we go. To what can I compare this generation? It is like children playing a game in the public square. They complain to their friends. We played wedding songs and you didn't dance. We played funeral songs and you didn't mourn. For John didn't spend his time eating and drinking, and you say he's possessed by a demon. The Son of Man, on the other hand, feasts and drinks, and you say he's a glutton and a drunkard and a friend of tax collectors and other sinners. But wisdom is shown to be right by its results. And then at that time, Jesus prayed this prayer. O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, thank you for hiding these things from those who think themselves wise and clever, and for revealing them to the childlike. Yes, Father, it pleased you to do it this way. My Father has entrusted everything to me. No one truly knows the Son except the Father, and no one truly knows the Father except the Son, and those whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Then Jesus said, Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. So here's this passage that I want to initially focus on, this difference between John and Jesus. So this is a slightly different translation that I think puts it a little bit more starkly. John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say he is a glutton and a drunkard, friend of tax collectors and sinners. So what is this talking about? Jesus was second cousin to John the Baptist-ish, second cousin. He was somewhere in the clan. And they had two really different approaches to the way that they ministered or talked to people about God. John came and said, I'm here to prepare the way for someone who's going to come after me. And he called people in the desert, out of the cities, out from their normal way of living, and he told them to make a fresh start. He baptized them in the Jordan River. And then John himself lived this life where he didn't touch alcohol, he didn't cut his hair, and then he ate locusts and wild honey. And this was John, a bit of a crazy man. And obviously the religious people didn't like his approach. You know, he's too extreme. We don't want to live like that. And then Jesus comes completely the opposite extreme, and people are like, too extreme. We don't want to live like that. So here it is. Now, as I was remembering John this week, I thought back to my favourite ever sermon I've ever mentioned, John the Baptist. And for that sermon, I was trying to find good pictures of John the Baptist from artists through the ages. So quite like when you can find a good painting, and discovered that the paintings of John the Baptist are just straight out and out weird. And so I was like, I know what I'll do. I'll tell AI to create me a painting of John the Baptist preaching in the wilderness. And I'm like, if it's funny the first time, it's funnier the second time, right? I think so. I still think about this and chuckle to myself. So I'm like, we're revisiting the pictures that AI came up with for John the Baptist. So here is the first one. He's quite buff, isn't he? Also a bit skinny. But here he is, and I'm like, I'm not sure that he looks like that. But also, he's massive, right? Look how tall he is compared to the hobbits behind him there. This is Gandalf, John the Baptist as Gandalf, out in the wilderness with his back to everyone, preaching to them. And I'm like, no, this isn't right. And I'm like, I can't have John the Baptist semi-nude. Let's see if I can tell him he needs to be wearing animal skins, is what I told AI. Could John the Baptist be wearing animal skins? There he is. I personally like the trim at the bottom of his robe there. This is kind of the Gucci outfit for John the Baptist. Everyone loves a little bit of leopard skin print for their prophets in the background. At least the people are sort of getting closer to the right side, but they're just loitering in the river. But I was like, no, we can get this right. So then I told it, no, he has to be wearing camel skins with a leather belt. So they got the leather belt, brass buckle, not so sure if that is what. But then I was like, where are the camel skins? Oh, there they are. In the background, waiting for John the Baptist to pull out his bow and arrow like they do on a loan, take one out, harvest it right there and there. So then I'm like, okay, let's see if we can tame it in, give it some more instructions. Where's it ended up? Oh, back to the beginning. Camel skins are still not there. Camels in the background. John the Baptist now walking on water. I think I said he has to face the people. That's right. So he's facing the people, but they're also not facing him now. AI, eh? It's going to take over. This was 2 years ago. I wonder if it's better now. Almost worth trying. Anyway, so now I'm like, there it is. There's our medieval painting of John the Baptist. I'm just reverting to that. No one knows how to paint John the Baptist because John the Baptist was a bit peculiar. There he was in the desert telling people you have to go without, you have to practice a certain type of lifestyle in order to be considered close to God. And I was thinking about this difference between Jesus and John and how people are like, let's bring up the controversy here. And I thought through the ages, where have some of the controversies been? And actually, I'm just thinking through the last decades. 1950s, there were some churches that held dances for their young people. I think Anglicans held dances. Then there were other churches, like Baptists and Brethren, and they wouldn't allow people to dance because it led to sex. And the joke became, you can't have sex because it will lead to dancing. People were so opposed to dancing. And then you had some movements, Methodist movement, initially Salvation Army, working with quite working class people, and they were like, you can't drink alcohol if you're a Christian. And again, the Catholics, Anglicans probably wouldn't have a bar of that. So this debate raged. I remember that debate raging when I was a young person. And then we've got tattoos. Remember that in the 90s? Oh, there's a Christian that just got a tattoo. Who would care now? No, but that was a thing in the 90s. Could you have tattoos? And then, the debates go on in church history. How do we resolve some of these tensions that we have within the church? How do we make decisions? So today I want to have a little bit of a look at how do we resolve when we have differences and what are some of the principles at play. But before we do that, I'm about to show you a video clip that the lovely Rachel Hewitt sent me this week. And it's around worship, because if you're ever going to find Christians disagreeing, it's the music that's being played in church. This is the fight beyond all fights. If you're in a traditional church, start talking about the organ if you want to see people get animated, whether the organ should be used or the organ shouldn't be used. People love this. So I've got this little video clip. It's by a music leader, the worship leader in church, and he's made a wee song with things people have actually said to him about the music. We're good to go.
I don't like your lights, your pants are way too tight. get your crap together, boy. Yeah. We deserve to hear hymns. I couldn't hear the guitar. Worship didn't really do anything for me today. It's way too loud in here. Could you make it a little louder? Why do we have to have so much repetition? I hate to bother you right before you lead worship, but can I make a few suggestions? Can we do more new songs? Can we do more old songs? I don't understand why we have to have the lights. You've done that song too much. Can we do that song again? The preaching is amazing. It's the worship no one likes.
Here we go. And I think it's probably every aspect of church life. We can't agree. Hymns, no hymns. You know, too many times we've sung that song, we need to sing it more. This is where we love to disagree. So how on earth do we resolve this? So the early church, no different from any church today, but they had slightly more pressing issues, I think. And almost every one of these early church communities were arguing about something. And so one of the early followers of Jesus, Paul the Apostle, starts writing to them to address this. How are you going to resolve this? And the first one is about, should you eat meat? Now, it's not about vegetarianism or veganism, although perhaps we could transport that into here. But this is about meat in those days was used in the worship of idols. So people slaughtered beasts, offered them to the idols, and then if you wanted meat, that's where you could get cheap meat at the end of those celebrations. So were you going to eat this meat or not? So here is Paul writing to the church in Rome. One person's faith allows them to eat anything, but another whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. The one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one who does not, and the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted them. One person considers one day more sacred than another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. Whoever regards one day as special does so to the Lord. Whoever eats meat does so to the Lord, for they give thanks to God, and whoever abstains does so to the Lord and gives thanks to God. In other words, God doesn't seem to care. You do you, whatever you've got a strong belief about, and don't judge anyone else. How does that work out? This feels like it's going to end up a little bit tricky. Like, well, how do you actually coexist when you've got these really strong... What if you're offending someone else by doing this? There was other times too where Paul is trying to talk about this kind of thing as well to the church in Colossae. Therefore, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. I don't know if you remember, I remember when I was at school, there was a massive big deal about sport on Sunday, and they had just shifted, when I was in high school, sport from Saturday morning, or particularly rugby. Rugby had been moved from Saturday morning to Sunday morning. I went to a Christian school and people were trying to get people to sign petitions. We've got to stop this. This is outrageous. We can't have this happening. And the government didn't care at all, or whoever the sports bodies, whatever sports or rugby in particular is going to be on Sunday. Until we all remembered that Pacifica players were our best players and they were not playing on Sunday. So I think they probably had the first year of playing on Sunday and realised everyone sucked. And so they had to move back to Saturday in order to actually accommodate our multicultural society that we are now. But here's this big thing, people were up in arms about it. Notice one of the few sports that is played on a Sunday now is hockey. And I'm like, what does that say about who plays hockey? What is the demographic of hockey players? But anyway, here is the debates as they rage. Should we or shouldn't we? And actually, me just saying that, I reckon one of the ones that is going on in churches at the moment, should you send your children to a Christian school or shouldn't you? Gosh, people get really animated. I went to a Christian school. I vowed no child of mine would go to a Christian school. And then I changed my mind. I've been told that the school that I went to, that I said no child of mine would ever attend, gets the best results in the NCEA with kids with the dyslexia. I'm like, well, that's enough for me. There we go. I'm pragmatic. Who cares? I'm going to switch my allegiances there. So here we go. Here's a little bit of this issue. People get animated, heated. There are some things I can't talk to some very close friends about because it's like, we all believe different things on this matter. So here, Paul is addressing it. So how do we solve this? Well, the Anglican Church has this very long history of trying to solve everything through this principle here. Turn to your neighbour. Can you figure out what this Latin phrase means? Hint, it doesn't mean we're solving it on Facebook. Anyone want to holler? Mediation. No, that's a good example. Yes. It's not via mediation. No, that would be sensible. That would be a good thing for churches to do. Medium, yes. Come on, Paul, you must know.
Yeah, the middle way.
The middle way, via way, media, middle. What's this? Sorry, for those that are watching later, there's a walking group coming. They're all coming up. Come on in. Here's the Anglican principle. When I studied at St John's College, that's where the Anglican training, every week we'd be hearing about via media. Here's these two opposing situations. The Anglicans like to go the middle way. And this is how Anglicanism started. We had Catholicism, so the Catholics, and then we had the Protestants, and the Anglicans are like, can't decide. We're going to go straight down the middle. We'll borrow some things from Catholicism, you'll see that soon, and we'll borrow some things from Protestantism, that's preaching, and we'll just mush it together, and that's how we're going to do church. How's that worked out for us? I'm not sure. How's it working out in our day and age? Just ask the new leader of the Opportunities. How's it working trying to be in the middle, trying to be a centrist party? I don't know if any of you are following the news on this. I love it. We're hearing that the Opportunity Party is a Trojan horse for the left. We're also hearing they're in bed with the right and are just borrowing their policies both ways. No one likes the middle way. Well, actually, a growing number of people are liking the middle way. But anyway, this is this tricky place to be in. So is there actually a different way of trying to figure out how do we reconcile differences? How do we make decisions? How do we have good conversation about this? And I think there is, and I want to talk to you about three principles that we can find. How do we make decisions? Firstly, make decisions for the sake of other people. Secondly, learn to be content. And thirdly, learn from Jesus. So this first one here, make decisions for the sake of other people. Paul, who's writing all these letters, is trying to point this out because there's all these arguments happening in the church. How are we going to resolve them? Let's think of someone else before ourselves. So he writes now to the church in Corinth. So we've had Rome, we've had Colossae. Now he's writing to Corinth. They've all got the same arguments going on. And he says this, now regarding your question about food that has been offered to idols, yes, we know that we all have knowledge about this issue. But while knowledge makes us feel important, it is love that strengthens the church. Anyone who claims to know all the answers doesn't really know very much. But the person who loves God is one whom God recognises. So what about eating meat that has been offered to idols? Well, we all know that an idol is not really a god, and that there is only one God. There may be so-called gods both in heaven and on earth, and some people actually worship many gods and many lords. But for us, there is one God, the Father, and by whom all things were created, and for whom we live. And there is one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom all things were created, and through whom we live. However, not all believers know this. Some are accustomed to thinking of idols as being real. So when they eat food that has been offered to idols, they think of it as worship of real gods, and their weak consciences are violated. It's true that we can't win God's approval by what we eat. We don't lose anything if we don't eat it, and we don't gain anything if we do. But you must be careful so that your freedom does not cause others with a weaker conscience to stumble. For if others see you with your superior knowledge eating in the temple of an idol, won't they be encouraged to violate their own conscience by eating food that has been offered to an idol? So because of your superior knowledge, a weak believer for whom Christ died will be destroyed. And when you sin against other believers by encouraging them to do something they believe is wrong, you are sinning against Christ. So if what I eat causes another believer to sin, I will never eat meat again as long as I live. I don't want to cause another believer to stumble. Here's what the fight is actually about. We've got freedom on the one hand. Choose what is right for you. Think through the issue. Choose it. You've got freedom. We've no longer got all these endless rules that we have to be bogged down with. What is it that I believe? I've done my research. On the other hand, the principle is love. What is loving to the people around you? This one is quite hard worked out in practice. I grew up in a Baptist church, and Baptist churches traditionally don't drink alcohol, probably because it leads to dancing. But they tend not to drink alcohol. That's how I grew up. And then I became an adult, could make the decision myself, and I knew people who drank, didn't drink. They both had their reasons for it. I remember going out with my university friends. So it was when I was doing a master's, the crew of us, there was about 8 to 10 of us, all went out together to a bar, and most people ordered alcohol, except the 2 people who were alcoholics there, who didn't drink alcohol and were in a bar with everyone else having drinks. And so for them in this situation, it's like, actually, I'm going to have an orange juice and sit with them and talk to them and make them feel less weird and less pressured, because that's how you operate in love. And so this is some of the principles. How do you figure it out? You've got to start working through the issues. You might be fine with it, but what about someone else? Years ago, I got asked to speak. Another church was having an event for young adults, and they're like, can you speak? And there was lots of people speaking. I was one of them. I think it was about the second. What I didn't know, and I talked to other people who also spoke at these events, and they told me the same thing happened. They would bring in the outside speaker to argue one point of view, and then they'd put their pastor up to tell them how rubbish the previous person was, how to make a guest feel welcome. So this was my job. And it was about Christmas, and it was about consumerism. At that stage, I was doing a PhD on how Christians respond to consumerism, so I was all about it. That was all I was thinking about. So Christmas, how do we get around, dealing with consumerism? So I talked about, child slave labour, what are we saying if we're just buying whatever, talked about all these things. But one of the things I talked about was this: many people go into huge amounts of debt that they can't afford to service in order to have a middle-class Christmas. And we just advertise that this is the only way to do Christmas. We'll put all our pictures on our social media of our food, of all our presents, of our tree. And my question to the young adults was, how are we helping those who may not have much money in this season? If we are endlessly kind of boasting about, I know somebody and they had, we've just put our 10th Christmas tree up in our mega mansion house. If we're constantly saying, this is what it means to celebrate the birth of the Son of God, how is that going for people around us who actually can't afford to do that at all, but to keep up, have to do it? Anyway, the person got up after me and told me that I was just being silly and was wrong. But anyway, this is the things we have to wrestle with. Are our actions negatively impacting those around us? And here the principle is, make our decisions in love for those around us. So that's the first principle. How do we know what we should do in a given situation? Is it loving to those people around us, particularly people who might be struggling in one way or another? The second principle is this: learn to be content. A lot of our decision making, if we really pull ourselves apart and look inward, is being motivated by a lack of contentment. We do something because we're trying to escape from our inner world. We do something to impress someone we do something to impress someone we don't even like. Our motivations are not always amazing. And again, Paul writes to these early churches, and this is now to the church in Philippi. He says this: I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. I think until we can find peace within our own hearts in the presence of God, it's going to be hard to make decisions to serve someone else. All we're going to be thinking about is ourselves. What do I want here? When we actually have that huge sense of peace, we're content, we can start making decisions with different motivations in behind it. Can we be content in our own circumstances? And finally, I'm going to come back to the reading that we read at the start, this reading from Matthew chapter 11, because this is the final thing. Learn from Jesus. How do we make decisions? How do we know what to do in any given situation? What, the old 90s, what would Jesus do? How do we know? And I think the key here is remembering this isn't so much about a religion, about rules and regulations. It's about a relationship. It's about a relationship with a person who created the entire universe. And that person knows what we should do in any given circumstance. And that person knows what is right for you may not be right for someone else. I think I've told this story before. Many years ago, I heard someone giving their testimony of how they had only liquid food for 40 days. And they fasted in this way. For 40 days, they had only liquid, and they saw incredible things happen in their lives and in their families' lives, and they were like, this is amazing, and they recommended it. Their theological justification was that 40 days is the life cycle of a fly. Like, I think you can probably go deeper than that. But anyway, so 40 days. And I came home and I was like, I'm going to do 40 days where I'm only going to eat liquid food. I got this really, really strong sense, do not do that. So I did 40 days with no screens at all. And that did completely change my thinking. I now know about myself. I have this weird blood pressure thing that if I don't eat food, I can faint. I didn't know that back then. I'd never done it. But I do know that now. And so here is this prompting. Here was a guy saying, this is what we should all do. It's amazing. It's not true. It wasn't going to be good for me. And how can we find that out? The only way is not by reading a list of regulations, not by listening to a speaker. It's in relationship with Jesus. And this is what Jesus says. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Back in the day, two ox or cattle would be yoked together. This is a yoke. And you'd put an experienced oxen with an inexperienced one. And because they were yoked together, the inexperienced one would follow the experienced one, and they'd learn what they had to do. And here is Jesus saying, if you want to figure out what's right and wrong, if you want to know what's good for you and good for those around you, put a yoke on. Learn from me. Now, if you are like me and you're like, oh, that looks heavy, I reckon that's obviously what Jesus' followers were thinking, because then he says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Here's how you live the way God intended for you to live. It's in relationship with Jesus. And here's the invitation. Come to me, all who are burdened and weary and heavy laden. No more striving and struggling. I will give you rest. In a minute, we are going to head into a time of communion, and this is another opportunity. It's an invitation. Come and accept the presence of Jesus. Invite him to speak to you in your own life. And in coming forward, we have an opportunity to respond to that invitation. Come to me, all who are burdened and weary, and I will give you rest. Now, before we head into that, I'm going to tell you now so we don't have to ruin the flow later. This is how we're going to do communion. I'm going to have single file that comes up here and get the bread from me. If you need gluten-free bread, tell me. And then go that way for the grape juice and that way for the wine, because we are via media here. You can choose whatever is right for your conscience. Go that way and then go out and round. Don't try and crisscross. You've got to go out and right round back to your seat. So it's going to kind of be out and round circle. So hopefully that makes sense. Come forward in one row, ask for gluten-free if you need it. Then we're going to go out there. In a minute, I'm going to play a song which captures this verse of Jesus, just so we can reflect on it, still our hearts, and be ready to accept this invitation to respond to Jesus and come to him. First, I want to pray. Jesus, everywhere we look, not just in religious circles, people are telling us what it means to live a right life. Whether it's what we eat, how much we exercise, how much time we spend in mindfulness, our whole world is surrounded telling us this is how we should live. And Jesus, in our own churches, in our religion, this happens too, and we can divide ourselves over how we should be living, what we should be doing. Jesus, thank you that you came not just to give us more rules to follow. You came to love us, to offer us mercy, and to be in relationship with us. So Jesus, now we give ourselves to you. We ask that you would speak to us. Give us courage to respond to your invitation. Where we've become lazy and we just like to tick boxes, help us to prioritise talking to you, getting to know you. May we encounter your risen presence today. Amen.